In the heart of the northern expanse, a land buried beneath eternal snow, silence reigned supreme. The sky, once alive with starlight, now hung in a mournful gray. Frost coated the trees like glass bones, unmoving, untouched. The ice witch stood alone on the jagged cliffs of Aelthrin, her pale hair tangled by the wind, her eyes hollow with loss. Long ago, warmth had fled her soul, traded for a crown of frost and a throne carved from sorrow. "Let them forget me," the ice witch whispered. "Let love freeze where it dared to burn." Below her, a child's cry echoed faintly through the canyons, distant, haunting. She turned, not in empathy, but recognition. That sound, fragile and trembling, belonged to the memory she buried deep beneath the glaciers. The silence shattered in her mind, and something ancient stirred. Grief, remorse, or perhaps a sliver of longing. For the first time in decades, her breath faltered, clouding the air not with frost, but with ache. The frost around her feet cracked, as though the world itself had heard her unspoken sorrow. Long before she was the ice witch, she was Serral, daughter of healers and singer of spring songs. The forest once bloomed under her laughter, rivers sparkled where her fingers touched. But the war came, a flood of fire and steel, and her village burned beneath the howls of invading men. She begged the spirits to save her kin, offered her voice, her warmth, her name. In answer, the frost god took pity, or claimed her. Her skin turned pale, her breath a winter gale, and her song twisted into wind howls. Serral vanished, and the ice witch rose. Now memory stings like a blade. She walks among glaciers, haunted by echoes of who she once was. "I chose this," she murmured once, "so they would never suffer again." But the truth is colder. She chose to feel nothing at all. She became the storm that once destroyed her, believing pain could be buried in snow. Yet even ice cracks beneath the sun. The wind grew louder that evening, as though the sky grieved with her. Serral, now ice witch in form and name, stood before the great frozen altar at the mouth of Mat Karth. The altar bore the names of those lost, etched by frost, rewritten each year by her own magic. But, this time, a new name appeared on its own. Lyora. Her breath caught. That name had not passed her lips since childhood. A sister, taken by fire. The mountain trembled, shedding flakes of snow from its peak. Serral's heart clenched, not from fear but from remembrance. "I buried you," she whispered. "I became this, to forget." The altar glowed faintly, and for the first time Serral kneeled, not in worship, but in mourning. Tears formed, fought their way down her frozen cheek, and where they fell, the altar's ice softened. Night descended like a curtain of ink. Stars barely pierced the veil, as if ashamed to shine on this cursed land. Serral wandered through the old battleground where her village once stood, now a desolate plain of broken ice and frozen ashes. She touched a tree stump, charred black, still smoldering in memory. The ground beneath her feet whispered with echoes. Screams, laughter, songs, all silenced. She heard her mother's voice, singing lullabies to the moon. Her chest tightened, but she refused to cry. "This place died with me," she said to no one. But the wind replied, whispering her name, not Ice Witch but Serral. The ground trembled slightly, and she fell to her knees. For the first time in decades, she whispered a prayer. Not to be forgiven, but to be remembered. Far beneath her icy throne, locked away in a cave of silence, the last ember glowed. Serral had sealed it there herself, a flame from the temple of life, stolen in her final act of despair. It pulsed slowly now, as if sensing her awakening. Above she stood once more atop the cliffs, wind billowing her cloak. Her fingers trembled. She reached into her chest, touched the frozen sigil embedded in her sternum. It cracked faintly. A choice loomed, ancient and terrifying, to let the warmth return, or remain sovereign over emptiness. Her eyes closed. In the darkness she saw her younger self dancing in the sun, unburdened. The echo of laughter bloomed in her ears, and the ice within her wept. The ember below sparked once more. The morning arrived without warmth. The sun struggled behind a curtain of clouds, casting a pale light across the frost-bitten landscape. Cyril walked through the remains of the forest, each step creaking upon brittle snow. This was where she once sang to birds, now silent. A faint trace of melody lingered in the air. Was it memory or wind? Her breath caught as she reached a frozen pond, its surface like polished glass. Beneath it, frozen in mid-motion, lay the image of a child reaching upward. Cyril gasped. "Lyora," she whispered. But it was only a reflection, a cruel mimicry. The face was her own, the child within, the part of her that once felt joy, now entombed in ice. Her hand trembled as she touched the surface, and the pond rippled with ancient sadness. Somewhere deep within a question stirred. Was she ready to thaw? From behind a curtain of snow-draped pines, a figure emerged, small, cloaked in golden fur, no more than 10 years old. A boy. He held a glowing lantern, its light flickering like hope. Cyril stiffened. No one dared approach her realm. "Who are you?" she asked, voice edged in ice. The boy tilted his head, unconcerned. "You look sad," he said. That struck her harder than any blade. "You should leave," she replied. "This is not a place for warmth." But the boy only walked closer. "My mother says where there's pain, there's a story that needs to be told." He placed the lantern at her feet. Cyril looked down at it, then at him. "You'll freeze," she warned. The boy smiled. "So will your heart, if you don't speak." Then he vanished into mist as quickly as he came. Cyril stared at the lantern, the only thing warm in the entire realm. Cyril sat beside the lantern that night, watching the flame dance. The light cast moving shadows against the snow like ghosts of her past. Her hands hovered over it, aching with the temptation to feel warmth again. Memories stirred, her mother's lullabies, the scent of wildflowers in spring, laughter beneath trees. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and hissed as it met the flame, vanishing into steam. She pulled her cloak tighter, torn between the comfort of numbness and the ache of feeling. "Why did you come, boy?" she murmured to the wind. "What do you want from me?" But the only reply was the soft crackle of the lantern's flame, stubborn and constant. Slowly, Cyril leaned closer. Not to burn, but to remember. The lantern's glow deepened, and for a heartbeat, the ice in her chest felt thin. That night, she dreamed. In the dream, she stood before a temple carved into ice, one she had never seen, but somehow remembered. Inside, warm golden light radiated through stained glass depictions of her past. Her as a child, singing to animals. Her cradling her sister during war. Her falling to her knees, begging the gods to stop the fire. But the final image chilled her. Cyril as the ice witch, face blank, holding the flame she had stolen, her eyes devoid of hope. The temple bell rang, a haunting chime that echoed through her soul. "You are not who you were," said a voice from behind her. She turned. It was the boy again, his eyes filled with sorrow. "And not yet who you must become." She woke gasping, fingers clawing at her chest where the sigil pulsed faintly, cracked, alive. Morning returned with a softer wind. Cyril stood atop a ridge overlooking the valley, the lantern in her hand still lit. The snow sparkled faintly in the light, as if the world was waiting. She took a deep breath, the air no longer biting. Beneath her cloak, the sigil cracked further, sending a pulse of warmth through her ribs. It hurt, but it was real. For the first time in an age, Cyril smiled, but not with joy. It was the smile of a soul, awakening from a long sleep, confused and tender. Far below, birds circled, and the trees swayed. The boy's words echoed again. "Your heart will freeze if you don't speak." She whispered, "Then let it break first." And with that, she began walking down the slope, toward the forgotten world, and perhaps toward herself. Cyril entered the Valley of Whispers, a place where voices of the past echoed like wind through chimes. As she stepped between frost-covered stones, shadows flickered at the edge of her vision. Familiar ones. Faces she had loved. Enemies she had slain. Each whisper came with temptation. "Come back to us," one voice pleaded. "Claim what was taken." Another hissed, "You could still rule all of them." Her breath grew shallow, her steps unsure. The lantern's glow dimmed. Before her the snow shimmered and took form, herself, cloaked in silver and crowned with ice, radiant and cruel. "You wanted to be strong," the reflection said. "You wanted to be feared." Cyril stared at it. "I wanted to be safe," she whispered. But safety had come at the cost of her soul. The wind howled around her, voices merging into a storm. She clenched her fists. "You are not me anymore." The reflection shattered like glass in the wind, and Cyril stumbled backward, breath catching in her throat. The valley pulsed with unseen energy, and from behind one of the pillars stepped a woman, tall, fierce, wrapped in armor forged of frost and shadow. "Do you know me?" the warrior asked. Cyril's eyes widened. "You were the war leader of the South. You burned my village." The woman nodded. "I was also a mother, and a widow. I sought revenge, as you sought power. Now I am memory." Her sword gleamed with ice. "Will you face your fury, Cyril?" The ice witch hesitated. Every instinct screamed to fight, to unleash her storm. But instead, she bowed her head. "No, I will not strike a ghost." The warrior smiled, sorrowful. "Then you are ready to begin again." And like snow in sunlight, she faded. As she moved forward, the ground cracked and opened into a hall of mirrors, ancient ice walls reflecting thousands of versions of herself. Some young, some old, some monstrous. One wept. One laughed madly. One held a crown, her eyes burning with greed. Each choice made, each path walked. A voice whispered, "This is the cost of desire." Cyril turned in circles, heart racing. Her lantern flickered, confused by so many selves. She dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. "I don't know who I am," she cried. "Then let go," the voice responded. "You are not who you were. You are who you choose now." Her hand reached toward the reflection that simply watched, calm, unburdened. The moment she touched it, the mirrors shattered, not in chaos but in silence. Only her real reflection remained, kneeling in the snow. Silence fell. Then, a soft trickle, water. Cyril turned to find a stream thawing at the edge of the valley. The ice receded gently, revealing stones and flowing current. It wasn't magic. It was truth. As she stepped toward it, the sigil in her chest pulsed with a steady rhythm. She cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted like spring. For the first time, it did not freeze upon her lips. Her breath caught, not from cold, but awe. "I am not frozen," she said aloud, voice barely above the stream's whisper. The earth responded with birdsong, faint and scattered, like timid hope. Her cloak fluttered in a warmer breeze. Trees in the distance shimmered green beneath the snow. The world was responding to her shift, not her power. It was listening to her healing. Night crept in once more, but this time, the stars were visible. Cyril sat by the stream with the lantern beside her. Its flame no longer fought the cold, it welcomed the dark. Her fingers traced the sigil on her chest, now cracked wide, light shining through like dawn through frost. "I was not made to rule," she whispered. "I was made to feel." The boy appeared again, this time seated across from her. "Then feel this," he said, pointing to the stars. "They are older than your sorrow, and yet they still shine." She smiled softly. "Even broken things glow." The boy nodded. "Especially them." They sat in silence, two figures in a quiet rebirth. Above them, the sky shimmered, and far in the distance, a single tree bloomed through the snow, its first flower reaching for the moon. As dawn approached, Cyril followed a trail of glowing snowflakes that danced ahead of her, untouched by wind. They led her to a forgotten place, a frozen lake ringed by stone statues half buried in snow. Each one bore her face, etched with different emotions: joy, rage, fear, hope. Her past selves stood in judgment, silent and still. At the center of the lake was a single statue she didn't recognize, eyes closed, hands clasped over its heart, serene. "Who are you?" she asked. The voice that answered was her own. "I am who you would have become had you chosen peace." A hush fell across the lake. Cyril knelt before the serene figure, guilt piercing deeper than any sword. "I did what I thought I must." The statue replied, "But at what cost?" Snow began to fall, not harsh but gentle, a soft forgiveness descending. The lake began to crack, not violently but rhythmically, like a heart waking from slumber. The serene statue in the center fractured at the chest, and a radiant light spilled forth. Cyril shielded her eyes as visions flooded the air, scenes of her life not as they were, but as they could have been. She saw herself healing, not destroying, loving, not closing herself off. She saw Lyora grown, laughing in sunlit fields. Saw her village rebuilt, children dancing around firelight. The pain of possibility was unbearable. "This was never real," she whispered. "No," the voice returned. "But it was always possible." The lake burst open, and Cyril was plunged into the freezing water. But instead of burning her, it embraced her. Light swirled around her body, not punishing but revealing. The truth was clear. Her suffering had not been punishment. It was her refusal to let go. Cyril awoke in a cave of blue crystal, breathless, soaked in melting snow. The sigil in her chest pulsed like a drumbeat, the cracks now glowing with steady rhythm. Before her sat a cloaked figure, hooded, silent, a mirror of herself. "You've seen what could have been," it said. "Now see what was." The crystals around them lit up, revealing painful truths. The faces of those who suffered by her command, the frost-covered corpses of innocent travelers, the withered fields left in her wake. Cyril wept. "I thought I was saving them from suffering." The figure removed its hood. It was Cyril, but with eyes dark and hollow. "You only gave them a different kind." She reached out to the mirror self. "Then let me carry it no longer." The figure dissolved, and with it, the weight she had worn like armor. Cyril rose, dripping, breath shaking. The cave walls pulsed with light, slowly dimming as her guilt faded into understanding. A single path opened before her, carved through the crystal. She followed it without hesitation. At its end, a stairway of ice led to a platform under the open sky. The boy was waiting. "You faced it," he said softly. She nodded, weary. "Not all of it." He stepped aside. "Oh." On the platform lay the frozen body of her sister, Lyora, untouched by time, preserved in the last moment of innocence. Cyril collapsed beside her, breath stolen. "I kept you here," she said. "Not for you. For me." Her hands hovered above Lyora's chest. "Forgive me." The lantern's light flickered beside them, casting a golden glow. And then, Lyora's eyes opened. Lyora's eyes blinked slowly, tears pooling in their corners before freezing again. "Cyril," she whispered, voice fragile. "I dreamed of you." Cyril pressed her forehead to her sister's, tears flowing freely now. "I'm so sorry. I thought I had to protect you from the world, but I was only hiding from it." Lyora smiled faintly. "Then let's see it together." Around them, the ice began to recede. Snow melted into rivers. Mountains glistened with morning sun. Cyril stood, carrying her sister gently. The boy was gone. Perhaps he never existed at all. But his lantern remained, brighter than ever. As she descended the steps with Lyora in her arms, the sky opened fully. And for the first time in her long life, Cyril felt the warmth of forgiveness. Not given, chosen. As the valley awakened beneath the thawing sky, Cyril carried Lyora down the mountain. The path, once treacherous and buried in ice, now glistened with running water and patches of green. But her steps grew heavier. The sigil in her chest throbbed, its cracks widening, leaking warmth that hurt more than any frostbite. At the base of the slope stood the ice throne, tall and jagged, untouched by the changing world. Her magic still bound it, a prison and a monument. "This is the last piece," she said to Lyora, who clutched her hand. "I must release it." Her voice trembled. She stepped forward, the lantern floating beside her. As she reached the throne, the air tightened. Her magic resisted her. Her sorrow clung. "I ruled through fear," she said aloud. "Now I offer it back." Her fingers met the throne's icy armrest, and the earth groaned. The sky cracked above her, thunderless but full of force. The ice throne began to dissolve, not from heat, but from release. The magic tethered to Cyril's pain unraveled like ribbons in the wind. Visions swirled around her, people bowing in fear, snowstorms summoned in rage, kingdoms frozen in her name. Each vision burst into mist as she let go. "I am no longer her," Cyril said, voice rising. The sigil in her chest burst open, a beam of light shooting skyward. Lyora shielded her eyes, calling her name. Cyril stood firm, arms outstretched, letting everything pour out, her grief, her guilt, her longing. The throne collapsed into slush. A warm rain fell from the sky for the first time in centuries. And Cyril, once the ice witch, fell to her knees in the mud, not broken, but free. Lyora rushed to her, wrapping her arms around Cyril's trembling body. Rain soaked them both, and the lantern floated gently to the ground, its flame still burning, undisturbed. Around them, flowers began to emerge, tiny, defiant blooms pushing through the softened earth. "It's done," Cyril whispered. "The storm is over." Lyora pulled back, studying her face. "But you're crying." Cyril laughed, a sound like spring rain. "Because I'm alive again." Her hands, once so cold they killed what they touched, now cradled her sister with care. From the distance, villagers approached slowly, curious, cautious. No longer afraid. Cyril rose to meet them. Her cloak fell from her shoulders like shed skin. She stepped forward, not as a queen, but as a woman who had burned her crown. The people bowed, not in fear but in recognition. The villagers encircled Cyril, faces filled with wonder and hesitation. Elders, children, survivors of her reign. She looked each in the eye, bowing low. "I remember every pain I caused. I carry it still. But I ask to walk among you now, not above you." A child stepped forward and touched her hand. "Your hands are warm," she said. A murmur spread through the crowd. A baker offered bread. A weaver wrapped a shawl around Cyril's shoulders. No words, only gestures. Forgiveness unspoken, but offered. Tears mingled with the rain as Cyril took Lyora's hand. Together they walked through the crowd, not as ghosts or rulers, but as kin. The ice realm was no more. In its place stood the first breath of something new. Not a kingdom. A community. Not magic. Memory. But the boy's lantern floated behind them like a quiet blessing. That night, a great bonfire burned in the valley. Cyril sat beside it, surrounded by stories. Children played in the dirt. Elders sang old songs. Her cloak had become part of the fire, its embers rising like ghosts set free. Lyora slept with her head on Cyril's lap, a smile upon her lips. The lantern rested nearby, its flame now joined by a dozen others. Cyril gazed into the fire. "Once, I thought strength meant silence. That love could only be protected through distance. But now, I see, love is fragile. Yes, but it's meant to be shared, even if it breaks you." She reached into the fire, fingers brushing the heat, and did not flinch. It welcomed her. She closed her eyes and whispered one final vow. "I will never freeze again." And for the first time, her heart beat without pain. With the throne gone and the curse lifted, the land began to remember what it meant to feel. Ice melted from rooftops, rivers flowed once more, and trees unfurled shy buds toward the spring light. Cyril walked through the village, hand in hand with Lyora, no longer cloaked in sapphire but in a simple woven shawl. Where once she had ruled, now she listened. She stopped before a fountain that had long been sealed in frost. Villagers gathered as she placed her hand upon its surface. With a quiet shimmer, water gushed forth, clean, cold, alive. Cheers erupted, not for a queen, but for a neighbor. Cyril smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. This place was never mine to command, she said, only to protect. The boy's lantern hung from the nearby tree, flickering gently as petals began to fall from unseen blossoms above. The villagers began rebuilding not just their homes but their memories. Stories long buried beneath fear surfaced like buried roots finally nourished by rain. Children carved songs into wood, elders told tales of warmth that once was. Cyril watched all this with quiet awe. She sat with the weaver, who once shivered in silence beneath her rule. "I never knew your name," Cyril said softly. The woman smiled, handing her a spool of golden thread. "Then now's a good time to ask." Cyril blinked, humbled. "May I help?" The woman nodded. For hours they worked side by side, weaving not just cloth, but connection. Her fingers clumsy at first, but steadying with every strand. She didn't need magic to belong. She only needed to be present. With every pass of the needle, another wall within her came down. Lyora stood beneath the great willow near the village gate, where once snow had buried everything. Now its roots drank from living earth. Children gathered at her feet, listening as she told the story, not of an ice witch, but of a sister lost and found. Cyril watched from afar, hand resting on her chest where the sigil once glowed. It was gone now, replaced by a faint scar that pulsed gently with life. She approached the group, and Lyora welcomed her into the circle. "Tell them what it was like to forget," Lyora said. Cyril hesitated, then spoke. "It was like being asleep inside yourself, hearing your own voice from far away, until you can no longer remember who you are." A hush fell over the children. Then one asked, "And now?" Cyril smiled. "Now, I remember." Later that evening, Cyril walked alone toward the cliffs where it had all begun. The wind was gentler now, no longer howling but humming. She stood where she once conjured storms, staring out at the world with new eyes. Below, where ice had ruled, green hills were beginning to stretch. The silence no longer haunted her. It embraced her. "I forgive you," she whispered, not to the wind, but to herself. A lone eagle soared above, circling once before disappearing into the clouds. Cyril released a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Not everything broken must be remade, she realized. Some things only need to be accepted. She turned from the edge, the cliff no longer a place of exile, but a beginning. Each step back felt lighter, like the ground finally trusted her to walk upon it. That night the village lit candles, not for mourning, but for memory. Every window glowed. The lanterns lined the paths, guiding souls home. Cyril sat at the center with Lyora beside her. No throne, no crown, just firelight and quiet joy. Music filled the air, not grand, but heartfelt. Her heart, once a chamber of ice, now pulsed in rhythm with the world around her. A child ran to her, holding a candle. "This one's for the ones we lost," he said. She took it reverently, eyes shining. "And for those we still carry." She placed it among the others. For her parents. For Lyora. For herself. The stars bloomed above like blossoms in an unseen garden. And for the first time, Cyril looked up without regret. Only wonder. The world was not healed completely. But it was healing, with her, not despite her. The next morning arrived not with fanfare, but with stillness. Cyril rose before the sun, leaving the sleeping village in quiet reverence. She walked to a place once frozen solid, the grove where her life had truly begun. The snow had receded here more slowly than anywhere else, as if it too had been hesitant to remember. Yet, in the center of the clearing, something extraordinary had emerged. A single white lotus, blooming in the soft snow. Cyril knelt before it, heart calm. "You waited," she whispered. The flower seemed to answer not with sound, but with presence. This was the heart of her story. Not power, not penance, but the simple return to truth. The cold had taught her silence, but the bloom had taught her grace. She closed her eyes and listened. And for the first time, there was no voice of regret, only peace. Lyora joined her not long after, bare feet pressing softly into the damp earth. She said nothing, only sat beside her sister and placed her hand atop Cyril's. Together they watched as tiny buds pushed through the surrounding ground, crocuses, bluebells, fragile greens. "You brought this back," Lyora said, voice hushed. Cyril shook her head gently. "No, I only stopped holding it back." The two of them sat in the hush between seasons, where neither cold nor warmth ruled completely. This place was balance, and it welcomed them both. For a while, they simply breathed. No magic, no fear, only belonging. A bird landed nearby and began to sing. Its melody was not new, yet it sounded as though the world was hearing it for the first time. Cyril looked at her sister and smiled. "We begin again, don't we?" Lyora nodded. "Always." Later that day, the villagers gathered at the edge of the old forest. Cyril walked among them, not as a figure of legend, but as one of them. They planted new trees, not with ceremony but with care. Children giggled as they watered saplings. Elders tied ribbons to branches, each ribbon a memory released. Cyril pressed her hand into the earth and whispered, "A blessing, not of magic, but of gratitude. Grow well," she said, "and remind us who we are." The people watched her, no longer in awe, but in kinship. And in that shared labor, something was born, something deeper than power. It was healing passed hand to hand, rooted in shared soil. The trees would not grow overnight, but neither had her. And in every tiny leaf there was proof. The ice witch was gone. In her place stood Cyril, the one who stayed. That evening, Cyril sat beside a gently flowing stream, alone once more but no longer lonely. She traced ripples with her fingers, watching how water moved around each pebble without resistance. The past still lived in her bones, but now it flowed. No longer a prison, just part of the current. A breeze stirred the trees and carried the scent of something sweet, jasmine, perhaps, or memory. The sky dimmed to a soft indigo, and the first stars appeared. She thought of the boy with the lantern. A figment, a spirit, or something older still. It didn't matter. He had guided her here. "Thank you," she said to no one and everyone. The stream responded with a soft gurgle, and above, a shooting star drew a line across the sky. She smiled. "I am not finished," she whispered, "but I am whole." At dawn, the lotus was still open. Cyril returned to the grove, one final time. She carried no lantern, no crown, only silence and breath. She sat before the flower and bowed her head. The world no longer needed her power. It needed her presence. And so she remained, not as a ruler, but as a witness. The lotus swayed in the morning breeze, and Cyril spoke softly. Even in snow, the lotus blooms. Her voice drifted into the wind like prayer, like song. Somewhere behind her life stirred. Lyora calling her name, children laughing, the distant echo of community waking to a new day. She smiled as the wind touched her face. Not cold, not warm, just real. The camera of the world pulled back, slowly, revealing the grove, the village, the valley. And Cyril, motionless and full of breath, exactly where she was meant to be.